No, we didn't have that. You said Schoolhouse Rock. I thought Jack Black, and you just got the name of the movie wrong. Like, that's where my brain went. I'm not sure that he helps in this situation. Hello, 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 and welcome to Well Shit. It really is that simple. I'm Claire.
And I'm Serena. On this podcast, we help you to understand about your 12 universal needs, why they are currently not being well met,
how to meet them in ways that work for you, and how to consistently do so in quick, easy, and simple ways that fit seamlessly into your life.
We'll also help you to understand how doing so will have a positive ripple effect in literally every area of your life.
If you like what you hear, sign up for more support with meeting your needs with your weekly Universal Needs notes at theuniversalneeds.com.
And enjoy the show.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, everyone.
So today we're going to be talking about something that this is such, it's one of these things. I met a friend for lunch a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about how the smallest things can make the biggest difference in like your life and your experience. And it's kind I mean, again, the show's called Well Shit, It Really Is That Simple for a reason. But I think that sometimes people underestimate the difference that something can make if you do something small, but you do it consistently. And that's certainly been my experience. And it's been yours as far as I'm aware as well.
Yeah.
And one of the small things that I help clients with or offer to clients very early on when they start working with me is small shifts in language. Because I don't think that we realize how much we are listening to the things that we are saying, and how the things that we are saying can affect us without us even realizing it. And so there's several of these. I mean, we have talked about, I think we've talked about shoulds, I believe, on previous episodes. I know we've talked about like problematic language. And I know that I'm sure we've talked about these. I mean, I'm sure you've heard us on the podcast doing this, because you'll hear us we'll say something, we'll be like, oh no, and we'll shift what we're saying kind of mid-sentence, because we'll suddenly realize that we are using a different language or language that maybe doesn't serve us as well. You know, it's really interesting. I was about to say, but today is one of the biggest things that you can shift. And today is one of the biggest things. So I don't think that people really think about what this word means and what this word does, both at a like kind of grammatical level, but also at a needs level. And the word is but. And it's so interesting how we're literally recording an episode about shifting this language. It is language that I don't really use. I mean, you can testify to the fact that these days it's very, very rare for me to use the word but. But it's so conditioned, she says, saying it just again. It's so conditioned into us. Like, I spent years and years and years saying it without really realizing what I was saying. And it's actually kind of funny. So this makes me think. I'm going to go on a little mini tangent for a second, but I will bring it back, I promise. So a couple of months ago, I was on the boat with a group of friends, and we were playing this really silly game. And I can't even remember what it was called, but it was kind of a getting to know you kind of game. It was very silly. There were lots of like challenges and like I can't even remember. Like there were like penalties.
You have to put your face on the table the entire time.
I did one of the rounds. I had to have my face on the table. The other, I actually had to become the table. Actually, lie on the table, and everybody was using my back as the table. It was really kind of funny. We'd had a few to drink. It was a lot. There were a lot of laughs were had. But one of the things that you did in it was, I think there were like 8 categories, and it was like, say it was my go. I had to say basically yay or nay to the category, as in, was it something that I liked or I didn't like? But before I did that, everyone else had to guess what they thought I was going to say as to whether I would like something or not like something. And it was so interesting because one of the rounds when this came around, I for one of my things was exclamation points or exclamation marks. And I'm curious, what do you think I said about exclamation marks? Yay or nay?
Nay.
Thank you for backing me up. So I said nay, because the interesting thing is that exclamation marks is another kind of language thing where if you, especially if like you're writing them, I mean, not that you use them in verbal language, exclamation mark in the middle of a sentence. It's not really how it works, is it? Yes, when you're writing them, a lot of the time, using an exclamation mark can actually remove the sense of kind of gravity. It can lighten things that maybe you might not want to lighten. I'm like, it's not to say I don't use them. There are times that I do use them, but a lot of the time I don't. And in fact, Serena used to use them a lot. And through the conversations we've had about it, your usage of exclamation marks has almost like completely ceased. Like,
it's
I
the
don't
same
remember.
thing that I have with but, and like anytime I see one like that, I'm writing it, I'm like, does this actually deserve it? Like, and it's because
does it belong here?
As I learned, Claire would like read things that I'm like, can I get another set of eyes on this? And she's like, oh, that explanation point, like, and the buts. And then like, I'll do it for friends and I'll say the same thing. And I'm like, I read it a different way now. And it's so interesting. Like now when Claire uses one, I'm like, oh, she really
means it.
She's exclaiming.
But it's so funny because nobody around the table believed me. Like, in fact, one of the people was like, they were like ready to get my sister. Let's test this theory, shall we? I'm like, that's not to say I don't use them. There are times when I do, but I don't like them because I think that they are overused and they often like undermine what's being said. They make something sound frivolous when actually it might be something that you really want to put some weight behind and some sense of kind of gravity and like meaning behind it. So
like,
it was
I love you with an exclamation point is much different than I love you with nothing or a heart. Like, and sometimes you want that. I love you, but a lot of times you mean like, I fucking love you.
I love you. Yes. Great example. Thank you. But it was so funny how like I'm like, hang on, is it? No, I know. And it was so funny because I think that at one point they thought I was doing it just to kind of try and win by like catching everybody out. I'm like, text Serena. She'll tell you, like, she'll back me up on this. Like, and I knew you would understand because it's these subtle, small changes. And as Serena, like the example that Serena's just given, like, I can imagine people listening going, what is the big deal of an exclamation mark? But imagine if someone who you really care about writes, I love you, or they were like, I love you. And that small difference could make a huge difference to your relationship, depending on the circumstances, the timing, the situation, the frequency with which it's said. I've got friends who I'll type love you, just love you. And then I've got another friend of mine where we'll always add the I on the front of it. Like, it's become this mutual thing between the two of us because, like, no, I love you. I want you to know that you're loved. That's what I'm trying to communicate right now. And there are some people for whom that's a little bit too much. So the whole love you, that's enough. And actually that's more appropriate in that situation. So like, and this might sound like we're being kind of overly pedantic with our use of words and exclamation marks and things, but it really is remarkable the difference it can make. And when we're talking about the word but, this is especially so because but has a very specific, it acts on the sentence in a very, very specific way that very few other words do. Because if you were saying, da, 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 but, what but serves to do is it actually, in some way, invalidates everything that has come before it. So it's almost like what we're saying is it doesn't really matter what comes before the but. What matters is what comes after it. So if I said to Serena, like, let's use the example we just like, I love you, but that shirt really isn't your color. Like it, like, yeah, it's not really something serious, but it's not really something serious. And it undermines the I love you. It undermines the thing that has come before it. And when we put this in a needs context, but is such an overused term. There are lots of terms in our language that if you want to go back and listen to the episode on the C word, we talk about lazy language and where we use things out of habit and ease, or because we don't really want to put any thought into it, rather than because that's what we actually mean. And but is one of those. And I think that a lot of the time, the reason that but is so quick to be on the end of somebody's tongue is because
Schoolhouse Rock.
Sorry?
Oh, did you not have that in the UK? Schoolhouse Rock?
I don't know what that is.
Oh my word. It's a I just assumed everybody knew. It was an old cartoon, kind of like, I don't know if it was tied in with like PBS or Sesame Street, but it was in that kind of genre back in like the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. And it was different things that were put into song to teach kids. So there was like one about bills, like I'm a bill on Federal Hill, and there was interjections which talked about exclamation points, but there was conjunction junction. It was like conjunction junction, what's your function? And it's talking about and, but, or, and it's like those three, and it's how it connects the trains together, but they don't go into this part. So you think, okay, it's an and or a but, sometimes it's an or, like, and it's sorry to go off on the conjunction junction tangent.
Hey.
You should look it up.
You know what's really interesting is that there's a TV show that I used to love from a few years ago called The Good Fight, and in it they had I think they called them the Good Fight shorts. Like as you were watching, and it was so helpful actually for a British person watching a TV show that was about the American legal and political systems, because you didn't always understand. And there were these little, and they were like animated, and there was like a little song that went with them, and it would explain like how a bill worked, or like what the 86th Amendment or whatever it was. Like I don't know off the top of my head, but it was so that's what that reminds me of. It was like, oh, it's explaining what something is. No, we didn't have that. You said Schoolhouse Rock. I thought Jack Black, and you just got the name of the movie wrong. Like that's where my brain went. I'm not sure that he helps in this situation, so we'll move swiftly on from that one. Yes. The reason I think a lot of people, I remember the beginning of the sentence, that's impressive, are so quick to have but be a word is because we're so used to seeing other people in conversations as opponents, where it's like we're challenging what somebody else is saying, versus somebody that we're working in collaboration with. Is like we're seeking to understand each other. A lot of people believe that if they see somebody's point of view, in some respects, they are like disempowering themselves, because like by admitting they can see somebody else's point of view, they're saying that they're right, and because what they're saying is different to what I'm saying, therefore I'm invalidating myself by saying that this person's right. So there's a lot of very combative approaches that happen in conversation, and a lot of people kind of get into this kind of argumentative or defensive, and we've talked about defensiveness previously in other podcasts, where a lot of the time defensiveness is because I've got an unmet self-worth need, and unmet value need, and therefore I'm going to get defensive because I think that by you telling me that the thing I'm saying is wrong, in some way that's about you saying that I'm wrong, which validates how I feel about myself, and therefore I'm going to act defensively, blah 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 blah. There's a whole lot of reasons why people act combatively in even just regular conversation. We're not just talking, and this is how like silly arguments can often become like big fights in relationships, in friendships, in work situations, because of the language that we are using, because we don't realize. Go on.
You go.
Because we don't realize the meaning behind the words that we are using, and especially the word but. We don't realize that if somebody says da 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 da, and you go yes but, what you're basically saying is, well, yeah, but the yes doesn't really matter. What matters is the thing I'm about to say. So we actually are acting in a way that is kind of antagonistic by the use of the word but, because we're invalidating what somebody else has said or even what we've just said. And a lot of the time, the thing that we just said that we say but to is normally the good part of the sentence. And then, so we invalidate the bit where we're like, yeah, we're on the same side. Oh, but don't worry about that. Now let me point out where you're wrong. And that's generally how it's used. And because of that, we end up in this kind of very argumentative, defensive, I said uncollaborative, where in actual fact, if we're talking to people, anybody, but especially the people who are closest to us, we want to feel like we're on the same side. We want to feel like we're trying to understand each other and we're together moving in a good direction, versus this kind of perception of this win-lose thing, which is like, I've got to win the argument. Well, it didn't have to be an argument in the first place. How about we just have a conversation and everybody's happy? But so there's so much of this kind of, and then when you get into personal power need and this and power dynamics and power games that people play to try and have the power, and they think that by being right, they get to have the power. So they try to be right, which means someone else has to be wrong, which makes the whole thing an argument. It's exhausting. And it's certainly not very good for your needs. Sorry, that was a whole big old addition before. Like, do you remember what you were going to jump in with?
I do remember what I was going to say.
Yay.
A lot of this is unconscious, I want to say, too, because we're saying like it's, but can be a very combative word that used in a sentence. Prior to kind of learning about this and bringing this in, I never even thought of it. And then and it was Claire that brought it to me the first time where it stuck. I'm sure I had heard it before, but like it was like, this is actually a thing. And I'm like, oh, you're right. Like, oh, that did negate everything that was just said, or like, and you use it, you don't even realize it. Like your point may not be to negate everything you just said. It may, you may be wanting to use and you just use but because of the habit. And also when somebody says something to you, oh, yes, I see what you're saying, but whether or not you know it, there is an unconscious thing going on in your brain that's like, they just kind of wait, they said just the opposite, or you know what I mean? Like there's something that goes on whether you realize it or not. And I hadn't realized that in myself until years after stopping to use the word but. And I'm like, oh, that was triggering something all along on both sides. And even with my communication with my husband, that was something like we don't use that, and we switch our language when we catch ourselves, because it does change the entire statement.
Yeah, it changes the meaning. And I think what you just said is really important, that whole thing of it being subconscious, because a lot of the meeting of our needs is subconscious. We don't really think about meeting our needs. Well, I mean, we think about meeting our needs a lot, shockingly, given it's something that we talk about on the regular. But most people don't think about their needs, and they don't think about how they're getting them met. What happens is that most of our need meeting is subconscious, that there's something underneath our conscious mind that's like, hello, there's something here. And so what that does, that part of you that is aware of the need kind of pops up to the surface, but it doesn't go, excuse me, we've got this need that needs to be met down here. Could you do something? Like, we don't really care what you do. Just something that would meet the need would be helpful. Instead, what it does is it pops its head up above the parapet and goes, I reckon that'll do it. And then we do something to try to meet the need.
I'm going to stick my butt in there.
Yes, exactly. It's like, not necessarily the best strategy to meet that need. It is just any strategy to meet the need. And what ends up happening is that because we've got all these kind of false beliefs around, oh, okay, so there's a finite amount of power in the world, and if I've got to win, somebody else has got to lose. And if I see somebody else's point, that's kind of like me losing, because I'm admitting that they're right, and therefore, like, there's all of these things. All of these things are happening subconsciously. But what ends up happening is that it is, and that's the thing, is that yes, it's true that all of these things are happening subconsciously. That is an accurate but it doesn't matter that they're happening subconsciously, because they're still having an impact. That's the reality, is that yes, we may not be intending to do them, but they're still going to be having an impact to our needs. And when it's put a needs lens on this for a second, if we're talking about using a term which invalidates what has happened, what has been said before that, or says it is less important than the statement I'm about to make or something else I want to draw attention to, what we're saying is that statement has less value. Now, depending on what that statement is, that could really affect somebody's needs. So it could be like, again, like, you could like, especially with a woman, if you say to her, like, say, well, normally you look great, but today your lipstick sucks. Like, the normally you look great, that is something that a lot of women connect their value to, is how they look. It's like, you did a really good job with that, but doing a good job is something that people get a lot of their value need met by. Like, I really like the point that you made on this, but well, again, like, all of these things, a lot of those things are the ways that people are getting their value need met. So what ends up happening is that the second that but drops into that sentence, depending on what's come before it, and it is depending on what comes before it, because it'd be like, you could be like, oh, I used to like peas, but now I prefer carrots. That is a completely neutral but sentence, unless you're a pea, in which case you probably don't want to get eaten anyway, so it's probably not an issue. But you see what I mean? Like, that's a sentence where using the but isn't really going to have too much impact on other people. It's not to say that you shouldn't ever use this word. There are times when it is valid, and there are times when it is relevant, and there are times when it conveys the meaning that we actually want to convey. We need to be very mindful about using that but when we are talking about sentences in which we are talking about other people, when we're communicating about feelings, when we're communicating about what has happened, because that is when this kind of invalidation happens, and that devaluing of somebody else's. One of the things I hear, this happens frequently, is how this gets used. I see your point, but I can see your point. Great sentence, but drops it down. Because what it's saying is, well, your point's probably less important than the thing I'm about to say over here. And the second that you do that, you're going to negatively impact somebody's value. It might only be a teeny tiny bit. It also depends on what your relationship is to them. Because if Serena was to invalidate my perspective on something, that would mean more to me than if some random person on the street did. Because I would be like, okay, bye. I'm probably not going to pay too much mind to that.
Customer service is another place where the but makes a huge difference. A huge difference. I had a proud needs moment not too long ago with Joe, and we were in we had something made for us, and it wasn't done the way that it was supposed to be, and the person, we were like, all right, let's figure out what happened here. We try to approach things reasonably, and the person was going on about this and this, and saying all the things, and then it was like, but things happen, and Joe was like, no but you just negated everything you just said. And I was like, yes.
Gets it.
But and that was the thing, and it, especially knowing the meaning of but, and not having that unconscious psychological thing happen, but being like, no, like, A, B, and C is the valid point. You
that
saying
stands.
But
after
means,
it,
like, no, just because life happens doesn't mean that you can't come through on your promises. Like, there needs to be communication. There, it can look differently than how it was supposed to, but it's A, B, and C is still valid. And that happens so often when customer service people like throw out that but. I'm like, be careful what you say after this.
Careful where you're putting your butt. Like, it can make a big difference to people. Like, I had a situation, I was talking with somebody a while ago where they were talking about like dealing with their child, and that they wanted to try and help their child to be able to not just see where things were challenging, but also see where things there was good in a situation as well. And again, this wasn't about like invalidating and going, no, we don't, like, let's ignore the fact that there's something that's not ideal right now. It's about like, it was about the both, and it was about like bringing both into the situation. And what they were explaining was that they were doing an unfortunately but, which was like, maybe it's like, they might be disappointed about the fact that they have to they were playing outside and now they have to come in, like, unfortunately you have to come in now, but at least you got to play outside. And we were talking about this, and this is where we're going to now get into how do we switch this, and what's the thing that will make the difference. And we've kind of spoken about it, we mentioned it a few times already, but now's the time when we're really going to start to focus on it. See what I did there? So I said to them, I was like, I love what you're doing, can I suggest one tiny tweak that could actually make a huge amount of difference to this? And they're like, yeah. I was like,
I just raised my hand. Like, yeah, right there.
Please.
If Claire had said, I can see what you're doing, but that would have been like, what you're doing is shit.
There's
like,
something wrong with
that
what you're
could have
doing.
been taken.
Or there's something wrong with it. And therefore, it could seem like, oh, I'm not doing, like, especially with like parents where a lot of the time they feel like they're not doing a good enough job, or they want to be doing better. Like, that could land. And that's the thing is, if your butt if your butt lands on somebody else's wounding, yeah, they're going to have something to tell you. They're going to have something to say about it, because it's going to it's not just going to impact them, it's going to impact them and also trigger a wound that's already there. So the chances are they're going to have an amplified reaction to that. And that's where all of a sudden people go, whoa, 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 that's a bit of an overreaction, wasn't it? It's like not realizing what they have done to contribute to the situation. So back to the conversation I was having, I was like, one little tweak could make all the difference. What if you made it an unfortunately and moment rather than an unfortunately but moment? And they're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I said, the thing about it is, when you say unfortunately but, let's use it in the context of that example I just gave. Like, oh yeah, unfortunately you have to come, like, it's sad that you've got to come in now, but at least you got to play outside. There's a kind of hint to undermine the feeling of sadness that they're having about the fact they've got to come inside. That's a valid response. Like, it's okay to feel, oh, I was enjoying that. Like, who doesn't get a little bit miffed when they're doing something that they love to do and they have to stop? I mean, even as an adult, I still have moments where I'm like, no. Like, there's not a new episode of my new show out, and I've got to wait another week for it. How annoying is that?
Serena, or like, you gotta put away the glitter. Why?
Yeah, exactly. Well, how many times have you and I been out of Bobby's and it's like, we really should go now, but I'm having fun. Like, yeah,
one more song.
It's now 3 a.m. and we were supposed to leave at 11. Like exactly. So yes, all the things. My brain went in like 26 directions at the same time.
Did you reel it back in?
I'm just trying to wheel it back in. So the difference between, unfortunately, you have to come in now, but at least you got to play out, and unfortunately you have to come in now, and it's great that you got to go out too. So you're basically saying both are true, versus one is slightly less valid than the other, which is what the but tends to do. This makes both true and both equally valid in the situation. And what that, by shifting that but to an and, what you do is, rather than kind of invalidate in any way, shape or form, you actually validate what they're saying. It doesn't just kind of neutralize it. It actually acts as a positive thing. It's like, because you're agreeing and you're going, yes, what you've just said, absolutely true. And this other thing's true as well. So you're rather than invalidating, you are validating just by the use of that one word difference. And then you're building on it. So you can then you can add to the conversation. It's not just to say that you stop the conversation at that point, because both things may be valid, both things may be relevant, both of things may be that you're wanting to add to the situation. But if you only focus on, and I'm very mindful of the fact that I just did that, but because again, if you're focused, if on the intention is, well, I didn't mean to invalidate them, but you did. What matters more? What matters more is being able to shift in a direction where you validate and build. And that's what and does in these sentences.
I feel like it's like but negates and invalidates, and collaborates and validates.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like, because anytime you're using and, it's like, all right, I'm going to build upon this, whether you're building upon what somebody else said or you're building upon what you said, and you are, you're like, if it is what, I mean, it goes in either direction. If it's what I said or what somebody else has said, it validates that first part.
Yes.
And also this. And as we've discussed, the but is like, well, that really doesn't matter anymore, does it?
Well, the key is that the but doesn't help the sentence. It doesn't help the situation. What are you trying? And that's the thing, is that what you want to do is think about, what am I trying to achieve in this situation? If this person is trying to help move their child in a direction of, like, let's acknowledge there are other things present as well as the things that we're not that are not so great at, what will end up happening is, if you invalidate their emotional experience and expression need, even unconsciously, even just a small amount, that feeling is likely to amplify in them, because it's like, no, I want to be heard. Like that frustration is like, hello, I'm in here. Don't you invalidate me. I want to be heard. And if you're not going to hear me, I'm going to make sure you do. And they're probably going to get louder, and they're not going to be able to hear the second thing. If that frustration is like, oh, cool, you got it. Still not necessarily happy about it, but at least I know you know. And that's what enables them to then start focusing on other things. Look at the customer service situation. The point of the situation is to support the customer. If you invalidate the customer's experience in how you do that, you are not doing your job. So if you were to say, so I get that this isn't, and life happens. I know that's not an excuse for it. This is a challenge, and obviously life happens isn't really something that would be ideal to say in a customer service situation anyway,
this person
it kind of
abdicates
responsibility. Yeah. And so I probably wouldn't suggest including that in your customer service dialogue anyway. And if you are going to remove the but, get your but out of the way, put the and in the middle. Same thing. If I was to say to Serena, like I love you, and I feel like that lip color doesn't do you justice. Have you tried one that's maybe got a bit more pink in it, or maybe a bit more red in it, or a bit more purple in it, or something? That's going to land very different to I love you, but your lipstick doesn't look great. And I know I'm changing the wording of those sentences, but if you took the same sentence and you put a but in the middle of it and you put an and in the middle of it, it is going to change how it feels to the person who is receiving it. Look at the example I said that comes up in arguments all the time. I can see your point, and I wonder whether you've thought about this perspective. I can see your point, but I wonder whether you've thought about this perspective. It's one word.
The and calls you in, where the but is like
pushes you away. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, it feels like there's a judgment on it. Mm-hmm. Like in that moment, it's like there's a superiority in that. It's almost like, I can see your point, but I know better. Is like the subtext underneath what's being said when you say the buts. Mm-hmm. I can see your point, and I can see another point as well, is what the subtext is when you use an and in that sentence. And as I said, this is a tiny, tiny change. I'm not saying that you need to remove but from your vocabulary completely. You've heard me use it multiple times on this podcast. But the way I used it is very mindful. I look at it and I'm thinking, is this going to be helpful to the situation? And Serena will validate that she's heard me dozens of times say, but sorry, I meant and. And. So as when it comes to any kind of language shift, do not expect perfection from yourself. If this is something that you want to shift, there are going to be stages to it. The stages to it are going to begin with, oh shit, I just said the thing I didn't mean to say. Let me see whether I can rectify it now, which is what I've just described. It's like, but sorry, I didn't mean but. Let me start that again. And and you put the emphasis on the and, because you're like, yes, I agree with you, and there's something else here as well. The second stage of making these kind of changes is where you catch yourself normally mid butt. I'm not going down that rabbit hole. Where it's like and so you're like midway through, you realize what you're doing and you start to catch yourself. And then the more you get used to it, then you'll get to the point where you'll catch yourself more often than not before you even use the word, and you can deliberately and consciously use the word and. Because when you are doing that, you are consciously and mindfully being aware of, I want to acknowledge what this person is saying. I want to bring us closer together. I want to show that I'm understanding what they're saying, and I want them to understand what I'm saying as well. You can be more intentional about your conversations, and this is going to bring your relationships closer together. And then you get to the point where, okay, now you're like where I get to, where it's like, part of me wants to say but. Do I need to say but? Is but the best idea in this situation? Maybe there's an and. Would and work? No, actually, I think but is better in this moment. Cool, I'll use but on this occasion. And but there is a thought process that goes behind, like, I do not show my butt without putting some serious thought into it. Like, that's all I'll say.
Especially not like in print.
Exactly. Very much so. Very much so. Very much so.
And I think that's something like both of us in print, I know we both think of, how it's coming across, because you have that little bit of pause usually when you're texting. It's like, oh, I can delete the but and change it to the and. I know when I first started this, with most of language changes, this was a hard one because it's a common change. Like, people can understand why I don't use some terms that are appropriative or that are
problematic.
Problematic. And there doesn't really need to be much explanation why I'm not saying a particular word. However, when I start fumbling over my ands and buts, and people are like, okay, she's having a moment.
Right.
And then I explain, it's like, I didn't want to invalidate what you were saying, so I wanted to make sure. And like explaining why I kind of had that fumble, then it puts the seed in their head and they're like, wait a minute. And it shows, like, I've had some people like really kind of like that kind of like blown away, taken back, like when I say, no, I just realized that but invalidated what you were saying, and that's not what I meant to do. And then I continue.
Shows you care.
It does it. It's a different level of like, it's such a roll off the tongue thing. I could have just kept going, but the fact that I stopped and brought it back and was like, no, that didn't come across the way I meant it, made it a lot easier for me to get into that habit of switching the language in the long term, but being okay with being a little fumbly in that kind of middle ground, because I'm like, no, I'm trying to do this because I want to make the conversations better. I want to make sure I'm saying what I truly mean to say, not say something then negate it with a but, it just to make the situation muckier.
And so many people would have just be like, oh, well, nobody else caught it. It didn't really matter. I'm just going to leave it and I'll try and get it next time. And the truth of the matter is, when you see the impact, the difference it makes to people, and a lot of time you'll only see that impact when you fuck up and you use the buts, and then you're like, oh no, that's not a but, that's an and. I didn't mean but, I meant and. Like, I want to validate what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. And I also want you to consider this perspective, or this is something that is important to me about this situation. Like, I see that that's important to you, and this is something that's important to me. And I want to make sure that we're coming up with a solution that actually meets both of our needs and is considerate of the things that are important to both of us. That's when people witness that and they see how much you care about not invalidating, because this is not about me having a conversation with somebody going, well, it's my responsibility to make sure their value need is getting met, so I better not use a but in this sentence. It's not my responsibility to ensure their needs are met. It is my responsibility to ensure that I don't negatively impact somebody else's needs. And that's something that's so easily, maybe just minorly done. But we also know that even if it's minor, it's a slight trauma. We talked about this. Go back and listen to the episode that we did where we broke down the 6 different types of trauma. It's still a trauma. And it might need to be a slight one. And if you do that over and over and over and over and over again, if you live with somebody who every time they talk about, oh yeah, I can see what you're saying, but I don't think that's really important, or every time, or it's like, yeah, I could see that's really important to you, but it's not something I want to do right now. Like, yeah, okay, I can see you've put a lot of effort into it, but I don't really like what you're wearing today. Like, you imagine that day and night over days, weeks, months, years, the impact that will have to somebody. And so,
and the subconscious impact on both ends, because the and does the same thing. The and has a subconscious thing too, in that, it's that building upon. It brings us together. People don't realize that when they hear the and, it's like, oh, all right, they've taken what I've said into consideration, or they've said this piece and they have another piece to add to it. Not they said this piece and then they threw it out the window with the but.
Well, and also it would, like, from a personal power need, it also removes the superiority of like, oh, I know better in this situation. It puts us on it. It makes each of our viewpoints equal and equally important, and therefore it meets our value need. It meets our personal power need. Like, it's so, and this is the thing, people like, I can't believe they're getting this hung up on one word. Like, and And the reason is because there are so many needs that are tied up in these things. And it's such a simple thing.
Sorry, there's so many needs tied up in your butt.
Yeah. She said it, not me.
I let a lot of shit slide, but some of them are just too easy.
Just right there. And this is the thing, it's like, if it's this simple to shift, which it does, it takes a little bit of effort at the beginning, but something that small can make such a significant difference to your relationships. Like my relationships with the people who are aware of this and make the effort in these directions are so much closer, stronger, deeper. There's more trust than relationships, not where someone's trying to be an asshole, but just they don't know about this. Again, and they just don't know about this. It works either way in that situation. They might not be intending to act superior. They might not be intending to invalidate what I'm saying. And the truth of the matter is, if that's how it feels, that trust is going to be a little bit less with that person than it will be with somebody who doesn't have that impact. And we go back to the relationship orbits episode, what will end up happening is that trust is the gravity that holds our relationship orbits together. So remember, you're the star in your universe and everybody else is like your planet's revolving around you. And trust and safety and effort are the things that kind of pull those together and move them further apart, which means that if something happens to undermine the trust or to reduce the trust, naturally they're going to fall apart. It's not like, oh, well, you need to be back out there because you said but in a sentence, back out there into the outer orbits with you. You will naturally just be a little bit more distant from them. So if you want to create trust, you want to create bond, you want to create connection, you want to create depth in your relationships, and you want your relationships to be closer, doing these small things can make a huge difference.
Agreed.
Anything else you want to add before we finish up for today?
Not that's not down a rabbit hole.
I was so hoping you were going to say something that I could say but or and on the end of. I'm like, that would have been a perfect ending. But we didn't do that. And we didn't do that. See? But even just that, like, that would have been a perfect ending, but we didn't do that. Sounds like there's something wrong with what we did. That would have been a perfect ending, and we didn't do it. Like, who cares? Doesn't matter.
And moving on.
And moving on.
And like I said, and moving on. But moving on. I feel like but's like a
yes.
wah wah, and and's like a okay, here we go.
Exactly. And then, like, it's like there's a reason that improv is like saying yes and, like, because what you do with the improv is that you validate what's happened and you build on it. And that's basically what we're saying. You're just doing it in conversation. You're basically saying, by using the and, you're saying yes to what the other person said, and there's this other thing I want to build onto it.
And it might not be yes, I want to point out, it might not be yes in agreement. It might be I hear you. It might be like, it doesn't have to be I agree. Like, somebody can say something outlandish in your world and you can be like, okay, and if you say it, and it can be something, you don't have to agree with it. Okay.
I understand what you're saying. I understand why why you can see it, why that it appears that way from your perspective, or I understand the rationale behind that, or I hear what you're saying. And you're right, it doesn't mean to say that you're agreeing with somebody necessarily. And that's so, yeah, thank you for adding that, because that additional, I don't want people to think that you have to say yes to everything. And the difference between, I can see what you're saying, and this is also another thing to consider, and I can see what you're saying, but it's like, I can see what you're saying, but there's still something wrong with it. So let me now school you and educate you as to how you should be thinking about this. And the second that you do that, without even realizing it, their response is almost certainly likely to be defensive, because unless their needs are well met, chances are you're going to impact a need that's already a little bit unmet. And therefore it's going to trigger something, and therefore you're going to get a defensive response. Now, a lot of the time when you have someone like people like Serena and I, if we're in a place where our needs are well met because we focused on that and that's something we're doing, someone can say something like that to us and we can be like, okay. it sounds to me like what you're saying is this. Is that true? And then we'll go back and we'll validate it. And then they'll be like, a lot of the time they'll be like, well, actually, no, that wasn't what I meant. What I meant was this. And therefore, and then you can get things back on track. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have somebody whose needs are well met, chances are these tiny little changes in language, those tiny little words can create arguments. And that's when people end up being like, how did we even get here? What started this? Like, I don't even remember what we were talking about. And next thing we know,
big
it's
old
like
butt in the middle of it.
Exactly. And then I put my big old butt in the middle of it. And then like we've got butts everywhere and nobody's enjoying it. So let's move on. Yes. So I think that's it's a great way to kind of end, is like recognizing that this is such an easy way to avoid unnecessary conflict in natural conversation. This is a way that you could easily shift something from being antagonistic to being collaborative. And just that one little word's difference, it may take a little bit of effort at the beginning, but trust me, the results are way well worth it.
Especially when you come to the person that's usually antagonistic about things, it makes a big difference. Like when you can see if you're in a position where normally it would be something that expands to an argument, and you change your language and you take out the buts where there might have been, it diffuses things without anybody even really realizing it. Like it's quite magical to witness.
And in those situations, what's interesting is if you're the one that's kind of removing your butts from a situation, but they keep putting their butts in, you can also say, okay, they said but I actually think that's an and you can start to look at what they're saying rather than seeing it as this kind of, and that might be something you want to say to them. It's like, actually, like I've just learned this about this whole but and thing. I'm trying to shift that because I want to make sure that I'm validating what you're saying. I would really appreciate it if that was something you might be willing to do for me as well. So like you can have a conversation about it. And if you're not at that point where you can have a conversation about it, you can also recognize that a lot of people just use this because it's lazy language, and that what they are likely to mean is yes and, or I hear you and if you can in your brain go, okay,
that was supposed to be an and.
That sounded like a but. Let's see what happens if I take it as an and. Now, I'm not saying that you have to do the labor of like if somebody else is behaving obnoxiously, and there are going to be times where you may want to push back and say, actually, by saying but, that sounded like you were invalidating. I just want to make sure that I name everything you said before that is true. That we're both on the same page about the fact that it's true. And I also agree, I can see what you're saying with the second part. So you can also start to unpick the buts and replace them with ands, simply in how you're responding to that. So you don't necessarily need to do it as a mental exercise. You can do that a little bit like Joe did, which is like, hold on a second. You said but there, but I really think it's important that we recognize that everything you said before that is true. And I hear what you're saying about this other point. Now let's move the conversation on. So you can start to remove their butts from you don't want their butt in there. You can take it out yourself. And some people will respond well to it. Some people may not, but the people who respond well to it are the people who you are likely to be able to create more bond and trust and closer relationships with. Anything more to add? Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I know we did. We both did. So we appreciate you very, very much. And we look forward to seeing you next week when we'll be back with another episode. Between now and then, remember to stay safe, take care of yourself, and continue to meet your own needs. Lots of love. Bye.
Bye, friends.
That's it for today.
If you like what you heard
and would like to see some of Serena's awesome facial expressions,
check out the video podcast on YouTube.
And remember, when you're talking to others, but negates and aggravates, and validates and collaborates.
Well, shit. It really is that simple.